Dave here again, pastor and shade tree theologian. Wanted to expand on some of our supplemental material here that I'm not going to have time to cover this Saturday in our teaching because it just gets too long. And I'm going to touch on one of the trumpet judgments of the poisoned water, and it basically is the third judgment where a meteor named Wormwood, or at least we assume that it might be a meteor or something, hits the earth and poisons the water supplies. Now, we have already seen in the second trumpet that a meteor hits the earth that possibly is 6 miles wide, and so it devastates the seas. This particular one is going to hit the earth and it's going to poison the fresh water supplies, much like we just talked about with the parallel of the plagues in Egypt to the trumpet judgments in Revelation. And so I want to talk a little bit more about wormwood and how it connected from the Old Testament to Revelation. And it intentionally echoes those earlier passages that we find in Exodus. And so wanted to talk a little bit about that. This is the imagery between Exodus 15 and Revelation 8. So let me just read Exodus 15 here. When we talk about Exodus 15:22, this is after the children of Israel have been delivered from Egyptian bondage, and they are going out into the wilderness here. And so Exodus 15:22 says, Then Moses led Israel from the Red Sea, and they went out into the desert of Shur. For 3 days they walked in the desert without finding water. And when they came to Marah, they could not drink the water where it was because it was bitter. And that is why it was named Marah. So the people grumbled against Moses, saying, What are we going to drink? And Moses cried out to the Lord, and the Lord showed him a log. And when he cast it into the waters, they were sweetened, so they became able to drink. There the Lord made for them a statute and an ordinance, and there he tested them, saying, If you will listen carefully to the voice of the Lord your God, and do what is right in his eyes, and pay attention to his commandments, and keep all of his statutes, then I will not bring on you any of these diseases I inflicted on the Egyptians. For I am the Lord who heals you. Then they came to Elim, where there were 12 springs of water and 70 palm trees, and they camped there by the waters. And so God delivered them from that. Now, in parallel, when we go over to Revelation 8, and then we go to the third trumpet judgment. Let me get back to that there. The third angel, this is Revelation 8:10. Then the third angel sounded his trumpet, and a great star burned like a torch, fell from heaven and landed on a third of the rivers and on the springs of water. And verse 11, the name of the star is Wormwood. A third of the waters turned bitter, like wormwood oil, and many people died from the bitter waters. So we have this thing called wormwood that comes and that hits the earth within that. So we take the story from Exodus 15, which the water there was bitter and undrinkable, and God made it drinkable after Moses had prayed to him in that. So there, of course, is a spiritual meaning there that God is able to turn bitterness into healing. And so that's kind of a spiritual principle there. And God provides life from death, and it is a foreshadowing there of redemption and also restoration there. And so so the concept here is that in Exodus you had the bitter waters. God heals it, and their life is preserved and their life is restored. So that's kind of what is happening there in Exodus. Now, later on, the Bible begins to talk about these different things with wormwood as kind of more of an imagery of bitter water as a symbol of judgment when the people reject God. So in Jeremiah and then also in Amos, God talks about this. In Jeremiah 9:15, he says, I will feed this people with wormwood and give them poisoned water to drink. And so this is definitely a symbolism there of God's judgment coming on there. Water should be giving life, but in this particular passage, it's going to be a source of suffering. And then over in Amos 5:7, it says, or it describes justice as described as being turned into wormwood. And so what should bring life, the fresh water and the justice that God brings, actually brings bitterness and corruptness. And so that's kind of a little bit of a parallel there between the Old Testament and the New Testament when it comes to this wormwood. So as we move on and we get into Revelation, in the book of Revelation, John uses that same imagery there. And in Revelation 8:10 and 11, the star wormwood falls from heaven and pollutes the rivers and the springs, and they become bitter. And so many people die because of drinking this water that's there. And so this is kind of the opposite of what actually happened back in Exodus with Mara. So we can see back in Exodus that it was God's grace that was there, that they came, they couldn't drink the water, and God tells Moses to put a log in the water, and all of a sudden it turns good. And in Revelation, it is this asteroid or whatever it is that has, or meteor or whatever, that falls to the earth and pollutes the spring. So it's kind of that opposite effect there. And so back in Exodus with Mara, the bitter water becomes sweet. With wormwood in Revelation, the fresh water becomes bitter. And so it's kind of a reversal in that. And so that's kind of a little bit more about wormwood, and you can kind of study that on your own a little bit. It's kind of a fascinating thing to look up and to see what wormwood actually is. In the Bible, it's kind of a bitter root and things. And so I thought that I would kind of bring that up a little bit. And we've got more supplemental material coming. So keep on watching.